Hi, I'm Rachel Bradstock with Octo Consulting,
And I'm Pete Oliver-Krueger with Gleewood Consulting.
and today we want to talk to you about what really is an epic.
There are so many definitions of what an epic is. It's no wonder that people get confused about what an epic is, how you should use it, and what the purpose of an epic is.
Yeah, right. You've got people who are trying to replace like old project management, like project plans, or I just need a place to house a collection of stories.
I think that's part of the problem with the definition of epics is it started with just this bucket idea that we have stories. We know we had stories. Stories was part of, the original versions of Agile, and we had a bunch of related stories that we wanted to group together, so we put it into a bucket.
What do you go with?
I think one of the great things that Scaled Up Agile did bring to the field when they were bringing in this concept of epics is when you work in an organization that has really large products or really large work that has to involve a bunch of different teams, you do need a way to keep everybody focused in that same goal and focused in that same direction.
So, from top down, bottom up, you're all aligned around that one vision, that sense of direction, that you're working together to define short and long term goals.
So if we kind of look at it from like sort of breaking it down and some of the stuff that we know, often we're looking at the epics at the top of the chain. And so they're the main core ideas. And then that gets broken down into features, and then features get broken down into stories. And it kind of has this relationship with the stories being for the teams and the features being for the trains, or at least the product managers. And then the epics going up to like, so the directors and the VPs, those executives up there.
Above the epic, you might have an initiative or two, maybe even a strategic theme or goal tying everything together, because companies are really trying to bridge that gap from user story all the way up to why are we here and what are we doing working together.
There's jobs up there in putting together that strategy, jobs for putting together that vision, jobs for figuring out, how to keep everybody aligned towards the right direction and towards, driving towards a business model.
But if you, as a leader or a business owner, are so focused at that level, how do you trust that your teams are going to deliver solutions that are still going to be aligned with your strategy?
Yeah, I mean, that's really the struggle of intrinsic motivation that we hear so much about, and we're supposed to be using this. And it's the not often talked about concept that I know I often run into with managers behind closed doors, which is like, all right, so right, all this intrinsic motivation stuff and things like that. But how do I make sure that they're working on the right stuff and they're not going off and working on like all the gold plating and all the extra stuff that I don't want them to? Like, how can we make that efficient and a good use of time?
How do we get there though?
It's one of the things that we learned in a lot of the lean startup research, that in working really hard with startups, that startups live on that edge. They live right there on the tipping point between being profitable and being able to hit that hockey stick curve of growth, or being completely out of business 1 week later. So they had to really focus on, what are they doing the right thing, and are they doing the right thing at the right time? And so they really got focused in around the business model. And one of the big discoveries of that time was that it was centered around the idea of the customer problem, that if you hadn't identified a really good customer problem to solve, then there was no reason for the customer to use your product. And once you sort of let them know that they had a problem, or you figured this out, or you found the problem that they were already trying to deal with, then you also had the question of, you had to give them a solution that they actually cared about, so that they would come to you instead of not going to your competitor. And so it created these two pillars that was sort of the foundation of the business model, in a lot of the early work with lean startup, that you had to have a very clear emotional problem, and then a very clear solution that solved that problem and also sparked loyalty and emotions in your customers.
And that's probably the hardest part of the whole thing, is having a clear definition of the problem. You have to do a significant amount of research into, what are some of the metrics that we would use to measure whether or not we were successful? Are we sure this is the top problem that we really want to solve? Are we sure that this is clear? And so you need to spend the time and energy into doing that so that your teams can be aligned. Because if you spend, days, weeks, months trying to clearly identify this problem, then you need to make sure that it's so clear that everyone on the team can follow it.
So a lot of the advice that we like to give for directors, executives, and above is to just focus on that problem. Get really good at defining what that problem is, being able to lay that out and inspire your teams to understand the problem the same way that you do. And then they will naturally come up with the solutions that solve that problem and put all that stuff together themselves.
Yeah. So as you're thinking about your strategic themes or goals, that might tie in nicely with a solid vision statement. If I'm thinking about a problem, am I visioning out this problem? As I'm breaking that down into initiatives, I'm still focusing on the problem from a leadership perspective. As that breaks down into our epic problem, still focusing on problems. And so we're trying to find different ways to tackle a problem, presenting that to our teams and giving them the opportunity and empowering them to come up with MVP solutions. So what can you produce in the least amount of time that's going to, or what can you develop in the least amount of time that's going to produce the most value?
And it starts to give some context for minimum viable products. That if we take that epic problem that we want to solve and think, how could we solve that problem or one piece of it in a month or a couple of months? And then that becomes a perfect definition of an MVP. And so we say, in order to solve this aspect of the customer problem within a couple of months, what are the features that we have to build? And how can we build them fast enough to get them out the door? And that becomes a definition of the features. And then those features get broken down into stories, but they have the context of this MVP and the overall aim, the epic at the very top to keep it all organized.
And the keyword to MVP is minimal.
Yeah, and there's this interesting phenomenon that we see if you go work with startups and you go work with enterprises. The startups all have their MVPs fitting within a nice small box that's usually about 1 month or 2 months in size. And then we go to the enterprises, and the MVP kind of gets repurposed to mean a new version of Epic and kind of adds a fourth or fifth definition of Epic. So we find it better to sort of give the MVP a purpose and say, what is a 1 month, 2 month iteration on this epic problem that we're trying to solve? And then let that drive the rest of the stuff underneath.
What's the least I can do that's going to produce value so I am confident that I'm making the right decision? Because if you think about it, if at the leadership executive level, director and above, you're focused on the problem, empowering your teams to focus on the solution, there's a lot of accountability that goes with that. And so now all of a sudden, you'll see a lot more thought going into making decisions around building the right solution. So when you're tying everything together, from your UX designers, your developers, your testers, everyone coming together, if you've got cross-functional people, even better, they're really trying to build something that's going to make a difference and solve the problem that you've presented them that's very clear.
One of the things that we like to recommend is what we call the epic problem, to really redefine the epic focused around that problem and let that be the province of the directors and of the upper executives. The rest of your teams from feature on down are going to be working on that solution. Your job is to define that problem, and let's go ahead and use the epic as that bucket.
It's a great challenge, and it actually is really fun to work with too, from a team perspective, because you feel like you're doing something. You feel like you're proving something. And so, tying it all together, if you on the leadership side focus on the problem, empower the teams to focus on the solution, then the entire working relationship just really flows nicely. And you have a lot more confidence that you're building the solutions that matter.
Your teams are already doing a lot of great work. They're already going to do the work that you would do and building this solution, as long as they understand your aim, as long as they understand the problem the way that you do.
Tying it all together, stop solutioning at the top. Think about the epic problem. Let your teams build a solution.
So we hope you like the idea of epic problems. If you have any questions or you want to bounce some ideas off of us, feel free to reach out.
So you can find us on LinkedIn or send us an email. I'm Rachel Bradstock with Octo Consulting.
And I'm Pete Oliver-Krueger with Gleewood Consulting.
Thanks for spending the time with us today. We hope to hear from you soon.